Hello there. This is part of a multi-part story, but it is not the first part. If you've not listened to Nerdspawn Genesis Part 1, I recommend you go listen to that one first. Or don't. Who am I to tell you what to do? After all, I'm not your daddy. Now, let's enter the world of Nerdspawn. Chapter 10. The three travelers somehow managed to grab a few hours' sleep in Lucky Larry's parking lot. Three grown men sleeping in a Mini Cooper was on par with solving a Rubik's Cube with your left foot while blindfolded, which is to say, it is possible, but only done by people with severe issues. The guys did not want to blow their $50 of newfound money on one of the casino's $49 econo suites. The meaty, compressed mass of limbs would have likely looked disturbing to any passerby, but fortunately for everyone involved, the windows were so steamed up that it was impossible to see inside. The snoring that roared out of the fogged-up car led observers to the obvious conclusion that a sinister mist beast was trapped inside the vehicle. The group woke at sunrise because the most recent of Adam's lifelong string of bad decisions was to park the tiny car facing eastward. After a bout of groggy eye rubbing, a short, quiet drive brought them to the Arkansas side of the Mississippi River, where they quickly found the intersection of roads Sanford and Steptoe. What they found at the address was a junkyard. It was not the good kind of junkyard, if there was such a thing, but more like a dump that accumulated a lot of rubbish with very little actual salvaging taking place. There were only a few cool old junk cars on the lot, but an abundance of outdated kitchen appliances and broken toilet seats could be found. The place also contained an alarming number of rusted tea kettles. The establishment was encircled by a high chain-link fence topped with coiled razor wire. The purpose of the fence must have been to prevent the junk from escaping, because no scenario could possibly exist in which someone would want to steal this crap. A faded tin sign above the fence suggested the name of the junkyard was Robbie's Place. Adam parked the electric blue car near the fence. Two of the vehicle's wheels were on the street while the other two rested on the sidewalk. He turned off the ignition and asked, "Do you think there's a massive dog guarding the place?" "Sure," answered Sean, "and I'll bet you it terrorizes the multi-ethnic gang of scruffy kids that play baseball in the adjacent sandy lot." He groaned and shook his head. Bruce wrinkled up his face in an anxious expression. "Do you think the dog will try to bite us in the crotch?" Sean nodded. "I'd guarantee it." Bruce frowned and crossed his legs. Adam opened the driver's side door. "Boys, let's go check it out and see if we can find our edge." He stepped out of the car and into the street. Sean and Bruce followed Adam around the car into the gate at the junkyard's entrance. The gate was locked, but a black button on a wooden post was accompanied by a handwritten note that read, "Ring for service." Adam pressed the button and a cacophonous electronic buzzer echoed through the junkyard at an ear-splitting volume. It sounded more like a notification that a spaceship's hull had been breached than a request for assistance. A young man, who looked about 12 years old, weaved around piles of junk until he arrived at the gate. He raised one eyebrow and asked, "What you all want?" The young fellow had brown skin and a shock of curly black hair atop his head. "You need a toilet? Maybe a tea kettle?" His hand clutched an old walkie-talkie at one hip. Sean knelt down to address the young man at eye level. "Hey, little guy, do you own this place?" He gave the kid behind the gate a polite smile. The young man drew his brows together and sneered. "What have you been smoking, snowflake?" He held his hand shoulder high. "I'm 12 years old. You really think I own a junkyard?" He shook his head. "Man, I'm in the 7th grade. Under his breath, he muttered, "Jackass." Bruce stepped closer to the gate. "Could we please speak with the proprietor?" "Maybe." The young man crossed his arms and eyed Bruce for a moment, then nodded. "I'll call her up." He uncrossed his arms and brought the walkie-talkie up to his face. "Mama, there's 3 white boys here looking for you." Seemingly inaudible static came out of the walkie-talkie as a reply. The young man spoke into the outdated device again. "No, they're not cops." He looked at the 3 men and grunted before continuing. They ain't business inspectors either. They look like a bunch of nerds to me." Static erupted from the walkie-talkie once more, but this time it somehow seemed more enthusiastic. The young man let the hand holding the walkie-talkie drop back to his hip. "She's on her way. It'll only take a minute." "Thanks, buddy," said Sean. He rose from his crouch. "I guess we'll just wait here." The young man grunted in reply. He did not appear pleased with the unexpected guests. Off in the distance, a big, round woman's hips swayed as the young man's mother approached. She wound through the piles of rubbish like a graceful manatee navigating inlets around the Gulf Coast. Finally, she got close enough for her features to be discerned. A wave of shocked recognition washed over the guys, and Adam, Brice, and Sean let their mouths hang open in unison. There was no mistaking the identity of this big, beautiful woman. She was Shirley from What's Happening. Well, she was the lady who looked exactly like Shirley from What's Happening, whom they met at Superhero Con 13 years ago. She flashed a warm, broad smile at the three awestruck nerds. "Now, look what the cat done dragged to my front porch." She put her hands on her ample hips and leaned a little to one side. "Long time no see, papacitos." Brice grinned as his eyes gazed upon the majesty that stood before him. He said, "That means little potatoes." The lady nodded and shifted her lean from one side to the other. "That's right. Now stop talking and stand there looking pretty for me." She winked at him. "You're like a bearded baked potato, gray and dirty on the outside, but hot and buttery on the inside." Brice blushed and looked at the ground. The lady cocked her head to one side. "So, what brings you to my side of the river?" "We're looking for an edge," answered Sean. He furrowed his brow while he looked at the lady. What's your name?" She leaned her head back and laughed before she answered. "Honey, you can just call me Shirley." The young man groaned and looked up at his mother. "They can call you that because it's your name." He looked back to the three men on the far side of the gate. "That's my mama, Shirley Hill. Now, tell us what you want, or else get your flabby butts out of here." "Hey now," said Sean. "Get over yourself, beanpole." The surly young man sneered at Sean. Shirley put a plump arm around her son's shoulders. "I guess you've already met the man of the house." She looked down at the young man. "This is my son, Emmanuel Lewis Hill." Adam put a finger on his chin and arched an eyebrow. "Hey, you do kind of look like Webster." "Shut up, a-hole." The young man wrinkled up his nose. "I swear, you say something like that again, and I'll punch you square in the nuts." "Hey," shouted Sean, "watch the language." Emmanuel Lewis Hill responded only with a raised middle finger. In truth, the young man did bear an uncanny resemblance to Webster. He was certainly short for his age, and probably had a cute smile, though it was yet to be seen. It was possible that his cheeks even had dimples concealed within them. "That boy's a firecracker," Shirley chuckled and her ample chest bounced. "He goes by Manny." Manny narrowed his eyes and glared at the three men. "But you nerds can call me Mr. Hill, 'cause y'all are nasty." Shirley's broad smile shrunk to a devilish grin. "It's about time you all showed up." She glanced down at Manny, then back to the men. "My boy needs his daddy." Manny's eyes shot open in shock. "You mean one of these crackers is my daddy?" Shirley nodded. "That's right, sweetie. You are the fruit of one of these fellas' loins." "I'm gonna puke." Manny squeezed his eyes shut and shook his head. "Mama, why'd you have to be such a hoe?" He opened his eyes and looked up at his mother. "I'll never understand what you see in these nerds." "What can I say?" Shirley shrugged. "Nerds are my kryptonite. I just can't say no to a man who knows his way around a TARDIS." "Come on, Mama," shouted Manny. "You're going to scar me for life." Adam put a sly smile on his face and leaned against the fence in an attempt to look casual. "I can tell you a thing or two about Capaldi." "Don't even try." Shirley wagged a finger at Adam. "Sorry, sugar, that ship has sailed." Adam pouted and resumed his previous posture, but now his head hung low. "It's a good thing you boys showed up," said Shirley. "Manny's been having a tough time lately. He needs a man in his life." She surveyed the three men and frowned. "I guess one of you will have to do." Sean shifted on his feet awkwardly. "Oh boy, that's heavy." He pointed at Brice, then Adam. "I'm sure it's one of those guys. I don't know how to be a father." Brice gave his beard a nervous scratch. I love 80s sitcoms as much as anybody, but I can't be George Papadopoulos. He held his hands wide. I never even played football. Adam's eyes grew wide and the color left his face. Don't look at me, I'm a wreck. The fingers on both his hands twitched. I can't be a father. Heck, I'm pretty much a man-child. I'm like a real-life Francis Buxton. Shirley drew her brows low. Who? Sean waved a hand through the air. He's the fat guy who stole Pee-wee's bike. Oh, said Shirley. I can see the similarities. A look of desperation washed over Manny's face. Mama, these guys ain't right. He looked up at his mother with sad eyes. You can't let them be my daddy. They'll ruin me. Shirley ran a meaty hand through Manny's hair. Don't you worry, sugar lump. I'll straighten this out. She plunged a hand into the pocket of her gray sweatpants and pulled out a phone. I just need to make a quick call. She punched a string of numbers into the phone and lifted it to her face. Yeah, is this the Murray Show? It's me, Shirley. She paused for a moment, waiting for something on the other end of the call. Yeah, me again. Uh-huh. That's right. I need to find out who my baby's daddy is. Chapter 11. The room was quite sterile in appearance. White ceramic tiles covered the floor, and the plain white walls were unadorned in the lab facility where they waited. Adam, Brice, and Sean sat together on one side of the room in hard plastic chairs. The chairs were less than comfortable, as they were a touch on the small side, and only a single cushioned armrest extended from the right side of each chair. It was shocking just how quickly Shirley made the arrangements for these laboratory tests. Within 90 minutes, the guys found themselves whisked away from the junkyard in this cold, sterile white room. It all happened so fast, it was as if Shirley had a rapid deployment paternity testing plan on standby in the event this very occasion should occur. The corners of Sean's eyes drooped as he faced his friends. She really expects us to go on the Murray Popovich show? He dropped his face and shook his head. That seems a little crazy. Look, said Adam, we can settle this problem once and for all. He looked at the floor and shrugged. None of us want to be that little heathen's father. Brice nodded in agreement. He does seem to be a handful. Adam poked a thumb in the center of his chest. He threatened to punch me in the nuts. Sean leaned to one side of his chair. He called me a jackass. He raised his eyebrows. Can you believe that? You buttheads do know I'm right here, don't you? Manny sat across the room from his three potential fathers. He seemed a much better fit for the hard plastic chair than did any of the men. Did you hear that? Asked Brice. He called me a butthead. He turned his face away from his friends and glowered at Manny. Well, if I'm a butthead, you're Beavis. Manny wrinkled up his forehead. Who the hell is Beavis? Brice frowned and grunted. It was a cartoon on MTV. Manny leaned back in his chair and squinted one eye. I don't know if that's a white people thing or an old people thing, but I've never heard of it. Sean tilted his head. It's kind of an old white person thing. He held one hand up by his shoulder. I don't suppose you've ever heard of Talking Baby. Manny narrowed his eyes and shook his head. I didn't figure you had. Sean let his hand fall to his side. Odds are 2-1 that I'm not your old man, so let's get this over with. With Sean's words, a Latino man in blue scrubs and a starched white coat opened the door and walked into the room. He held a red plastic basket in one hand that contained various medical supplies. Sean smiled at the man and asked, Are you the nurse? The man shook his head and answered, I'm a phlebotomist. I'm sorry. Sean held his palm out in the man's direction, but I'm not comfortable discussing religion with a nurse. Adam rolled his eyes and smirked. Sean, you idiot! This nurse is clearly very proud of his stamp collection. Brice chuckled. Adam, you're thinking of a philatelist. A phlebotomist is someone who gives to worthy causes. I swear, all y'all are fools. Manny crossed his arms while he leaned back in the chair. This man's here to draw blood. The phlebotomist nodded. That's right. Manny groaned. Ugh, I better not catch whatever disease made your brain shrivel up. Hey, shouted Brice. We've got a lot of brains in our heads. Manny gave his head a slow shake. I'm sure whatever's in your head is rattling around like, his face scrunched up, like loose change in a washing machine. The phlebotomist reasserted himself in the situation. Who would like to go first? Oh, geez. Sean clenched his teeth and looked at the floor. I'd really like to, but I'm not very good with needles. He looked over at Adam. Why don't you go first? Yeah, right. Adam sat up in his uncomfortable chair. As soon as he gets my blood, you two will skedaddle out of here like a cheap date when the bill arrives. He shook his head. I'm not going to be tricked into flying solo on this mission. Brice furrowed his brow and asked, will it hurt? The phlebotomist sighed, then tried to smile. There will be some mild discomfort, but it only takes about 10 seconds to obtain an adequate sample. I don't know, guys, said Brice. He made it sound agonizing. Adam put a hand on his chin and cocked his head to one side. We can settle this fair and square. He arched an eyebrow. Let's all pick a number between 1 and 10. Sean smiled and winked. Got it. Brice nodded. Me too. Adam held up a finger. Now, when I count to 3, we'll all shout out our number. Sounds fair, said Brice. Okay, agreed Sean. Adam put his hand on the armrest. 1, 2, 3. Brice shouted, 1. Sean spat out, 2. Adam chimed in, 3. He looked across the sparsely furnished room to Manny. Okay, little guy, who got the closest? Manny wrinkled his forehead. Closest to what? Adam pointed at Manny. Who got closest to the number you were thinking of? Manny said, I wasn't thinking of any number. He turned his head away. I'm minding my own business. Well, crap. Adam threw up his hands. We'll need to do it again. Okay, Manny, we need you to think of a number. Oh, heck no. Manny waved his arms in front of his face. You ain't pulling me into your game of Nerdywood squares. He pointed at Brice. Why don't you just make Beardy go first? Fine, Brice huffed. I'll go first. He stood up and began to unfasten the belt around his short-legged pants. The phlebotomist gasped. What are you doing? I'm making it easier for you to get to a butt cheek, answered Brice. The phlebotomist frowned. That's not necessary. I'll collect the sample from your arm. He tilted his head and asked, When's the last time you went to a doctor's office? I hate doctors, Brice narrowed his eyes. They always make me take my pants off, especially that ophthalmologist in Indian Hill. Please, pleaded the phlebotomist. For the benefit of everyone involved, keep your pants on. He raised an eyebrow. Also, you might want to find a new ophthalmologist. Brice sat back down and extended his arm along the chair's armrest. Please be gentle. He squeezed his eyes shut. The phlebotomist placed a rubber tourniquet around Brice's upper arm and wiped the skin with an alcohol pad. Brice opened his eyes and flashed a wide smile. Hey, that's not so bad. The phlebotomist plunged the 18-gauge hypodermic needle into Brice's antecubital vein. Brice screamed, For the love of God! He sniffed as tears welled up in his eyes. What kind of unholy monster are you? The phlebotomist tried to conceal his laughter as the vial filled with blood. He said, All finished. In a single quick motion, the man removed the needle and tourniquet from Brice's arm. Brice rubbed one eye with the back of his hand. Do I get a lollipop? Sure, answered the phlebotomist. He reached into one of the pockets on his white coat and pulled out a dum-dum. Brice snatched the candy and said, It was a pleasure doing business with you. Manny sneered at Brice. Son, when you were born, the doctor didn't just drop you on your head. He must have dropped you down an elevator shaft. Brice sneered. Sean nodded toward Adam. You're up, big guy. Adam's mouth became a hard line. Fine. He stretched out his arm. The phlebotomist wrapped a strip of rubber around the man's arm and began to tie it. Adam stared at the tourniquet. Any chance you could use a leather belt instead? No, answered the confused phlebotomist. Why would I do that? Adam shrugged. I just really like train spotting. He held up a finger. The movie and the activity. The tourniquet should work fine, answered the phlebotomist, his annoyance growing more obvious. Well, do what you gotta do. Adam turned his face away. Yelp users will read about this. The phlebotomist took a deep breath and drew the blood. Adam bit down on the knuckles of his free hand as the vial filled with a few milliliters of red fluid. The phlebotomist labeled the sample and placed it into his basket. He looked at Sean with trepidation and asked, Are you ready, sir? Wait a minute, shouted Adam. Aren't you forgetting something? The phlebotomist closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead for a moment. He plucked another lollipop from his pocket and held it out. Here's your sucker. Adam giggled as he snagged the lollipop and hurriedly unwrapped it. Sean leaned forward in his chair. Is there any chance I could get my dum-dum ahead of time? The phlebotomist drew his eyebrows together while he considered the request. That's not really standard procedure. Sean let out a smug laugh and held his hands wide. What? Are you afraid we'll report you to the state nursing board? The veins in the phlebotomist's temples pulsated. He said, I'm a phlebotomist. Sean held up a hand. I already told you, I don't want to hear about your wacky stamp-based religion. Look, said the phlebotomist, if I give you the lollipop, will you quit talking and let me do my job? Sean grinned and leaned back. Well, I can't exactly talk and savor a delicious dum-dum at the same time, can I? The phlebotomist thrust a sucker toward Sean. Just take it. Gladly. Sean grabbed the lollipop, yanked off the wrapper, and popped it into his mouth. The phlebotomist put a firm hand on Sean's arm and prepared it for venipuncture. After isolating a vein, he plunged the needle into it with a look of glee on his face. Sean bit down on the lollipop and the needle struck him. It made a loud crunch and he spit out the stick. Jesus! He cried. Is this what you do since they shut down Guantanamo? The phlebotomist scowled at Sean. You're not getting another sucker. Manny said, if you ask me, there's already too many suckers in this room. The phlebotomist gave Manny a nod. Preach on, hermano. Sean opened his eyes wide. Did you think that Guantanamo crack was because you're Latino? He shook his head. I didn't mean that. I just meant that you're a cruel sadist. I've never said this to a patient before, said the phlebotomist, but I hate you. Sean glanced at Bruce and then at him. Somebody's a touchy nurse. Shut up, barked Manny. He held out his arm. Now, draw my blood so we can show these fools how a normal person does. No problem. The phlebotomist tied the rubber strip around the young man's arm and cleaned the skin with alcohol. He attempted to puncture the vein, but the needle bent into the shape of a hockey stick without breaking the skin. Manny raised his eyebrows. What happened? I'm sorry. The phlebotomist inspected the tiny bent piece of metal in his fingers. This must have been a defective needle. He discarded it into his basket's sharps container. Manny shrugged. I guess we ought to try again. The phlebotomist nodded. Yes. He opened a new needle and pressed it against Manny's inner elbow. The needle bent, this time at a sharp angle that made it look like the letter V. The phlebotomist scratched his head. I'm so sorry. This has never happened before. Manny's nostrils flared. Don't tell me those nincompoops got their stupid on you. Not at all, sir. The phlebotomist discarded the ruined needle and grabbed a new one. He made a third attempt at collecting the young man's blood. He jabbed the needle at a harsher angle with significantly more force. The needle snapped in half like a dry twig. Manny asked, What's going on? His wrinkled forehead and drooping eyes betrayed the worry he now felt. Nothing's wrong. The phlebotomist rushed to untie the rubber tourniquet. Everything is fine. He stood up straight and grabbed his basket. Wait here. His expression hardened and he trotted toward the door. I'm going to get the doctor. Chapter 12. The door to the sterile room with the plastic chairs opened. A lady clad in yellow floral print scrubs stood in the threshold. Her light brown hair was wound into a tight bun atop her head, and she had a businesslike smile on her face. She looked about 45, wore glasses with thick black frames, and seemed to go a little heavy on her makeup. The lady said, Could you gentlemen please come with me? Adam shrugged. Sure. Where are we going? The lady answered, I'm taking you to speak with Dr. Hammerclaw in the conference room. Hammerclaw, eh? Said Bruce. He doesn't, by chance, have a white Persian cat on his lap, does he? No. The lady screwed up her face in its thick layer of multicolored pigments. This is a doctor's office, not a vet. Sean sighed. Some people just don't appreciate a good spy thriller. Come along now. The lady's voice sounded impatient. The doctor is waiting for you. Manny rose and walked toward the door with his 3 potential fathers close behind him. They followed their guide in a silent, single-file line. The lady led them through a wide corridor with inoffensive instrumental music dribbling out from the speakers embedded in the ceiling tiles. She came to a door with the number 17 painted on it and pulled it open. The lady said, Go on in and have a seat. The conference room was decorated with standard, boring corporate fare, down to the fake ficus in one corner. A large, unoccupied oak desk was near the far wall with a framed poster above it. The poster featured a cartoon double helix with big eyes that was clearly lifted whole cloth from Jurassic Park. Below the DNA-inspired character were the words, KinGen, we're here for all the genetic testing needs of you, your kin, and your could-be kin. a proud supporter of the Murray Popovich Show. In the center of the room was a large conference table with 3 people already seated. Shirley, from what's happening, was seated at the near end. A man presumed to be the aforementioned Dr. Hammerclaw was seated near the middle, and a guy in his early 20s with a less than stellar complexion sat at the far end. The guys walked in and sat in 4 of the 5 unoccupied seats. The chairs had armrests and a fair bit of padding in the seats, which made them infinitely more comfortable than the hard plastic chairs they had recently vacated. "Hello, I'm Dr. Hammerclaw." The doctor had dark hair plastered against his scalp by an absurd amount of hair gel. "I'm the medical director here at Junkyard Genetic Testing Services." He was gray at the temples, and his upper lip sported a pencil-thin mustache that begged to be twirled. A clean white coat covered his torso, and the upper portion of a blue necktie plunged beneath the coat. Manny nodded his head toward the 20-something guy seated at the table. "Who's the pizza face?" he asked. Shirley waved a plump hand through the air. "That's just Kevin." Kevin introduced himself. "I'm a producer for Mr. Popovich. I'm handling the arrangements for Ms. Hill's appearance on the show." He was clad in khaki trousers and a red golf shirt with a black messenger bag slung across his torso. "Kevin, buddy," said Sean, "I've got some bad news for you." "Yeah?" Kevin furrowed his bumpy brow. "What's that?" His voice cracked when he asked the question. "The doc here," Sean pointed across the table to Dr. Hammerclaw, "he can't tell you which one of us is the daddy." "What?" Kevin's eyes opened wide as his expression morphed from curious to furious in an instant. "Dr. Hammerclaw, is that true?" "Perhaps not." The doctor held up a hand in Kevin's direction to dissuade him from speaking further. "I may have a case report." Shirley leaned back and crossed her arms. "You mean about my baby?" "Yes, that's right." The doctor rested his hand on the table and looked at Shirley. "Also, I may have the answer to his true parentage." Shirley smiled and leaned forward, her arms still crossed. "God wouldn't have given me these big ears if he didn't want me to listen, so start talking." The doctor steepled his fingers while his elbows rested against the table. "I read about a strange phenomenon a little over 10 years ago." His index finger rested gently against his chin. "What journal was that?" He stared at the ceiling for a moment, then lowered his eyes back to Shirley. "I believe it was the Old England Journal of Southeastern American Medical Oddities." "Is that a reputable journal?" asked Sean. "Very," answered the doctor. Bruce narrowed his eyes and leaned against the table. "What kind of phenomenon?" "It was 13 years ago." The doctor rubbed his chin and stared off in the distance. "A shipment of black market fluorescent lights from Estonia managed to get to the United States. They were never inspected by customs." Adam frowned and tilted his head. "Who buys black market light bulbs?" The doctor arched an eyebrow and looked at Adam. "Institutions with cumbersome lighting demands. That's who does so." He resumed his distant stare. "The mercury vapor in the lights mixed with traces of nuclear submarine waste." Adam narrowed his eyes. How would nuclear submarine waste get into light bulbs? The doctor flashed Adam an insincere smile. "The highly radioactive material leaked out of the factory's cafeteria and contaminated the bulb fabrication machines." Sean raised his eyebrows and nodded. "That sure sounds like Estonia." He laughed under his breath. "There's nobody like those wacky Estonians." The doctor continued. "The vapor mixed with the waste inside the tubes, and when stimulated by electric current, the combination emitted RZEWs into the environment." Manny wrinkled up his nose. "What in the hell are those?" The doctor's absent gaze settled on Manny. "Those are radiant zygote enhancement waves." "And what do they have to do with us?" asked Bruce. The doctor pointed his insincere smile toward Bruce. "That small shipment was only delivered to one location." He rose from his chair with a smug grin on his face and waited for someone to ask the next question. Adam leaned back in his chair and placed his hands on his thighs. "Thank God it wasn't Charlotte." The doctor groaned in a way that suggested his level of perturbedness had reached a historic new high. He snapped, "The location was the Charlotte Convention Center." Sean gasped. "What?" You heard me. The doctor waved his hands around in the air. Normally, these rays are harmless to humans. Adam wiped beads of sweat from his forehead with the back of one hand. Thank God we're humans. Bruce looked up at the standing doctor. Are there any exceptions? There is one exception. The doctor held a finger in the air. Subjects are particularly susceptible to the wave's effects at the moment of conception. Conception? Bruce drew his eyebrows together. Conception of what? Shirley grunted. Conception of babies. She rolled her eyes and shook her head. You nerds might be pretty, but Lord, I swear y'all are slow in the uptake. The doctor attempted to reclaim everyone's attention. Any child conceived inside the Charlotte Convention Center during normal business hours 13 years ago would be mutated the moment the gametes fused. Manny grimaced. Doc, you took something gross and made it sound absolutely disgusting. He put a hand on his stomach. I'm about to toss my Captain Crunch. Please, Manny. The doctor held a hand in the young man's direction. Try to keep your gastric contents in the proper place. He looked down at the floor. It would be most unfortunate to get vomitus on our new carpet. Manny squeezed his eyes shut. What you just said ain't helping matters. The point of all this, the doctor held his hands wide. Any child conceived in such a manner would have special... He frowned and thought for a quick moment. Well, I guess one would say special abilities. His hands dropped to his sides, and he looked at Manny. I believe this may be the reason young Emmanuel's skin cannot be penetrated by a needle. Okay, said Shirley. So what? The doctor sighed. So there's the answer. The answer to what? Asked Adam. Who the father is, answered the doctor. Bruce squinted at the man in the white coat. How? Simple, you see. The doctor put his hands on his narrow hips. The man who coupled with Miss Hill under those fluorescent lights must be the father. He looked at each of the three men across the table from him one at a time. Which one of you, engaged in that particular activity? Adam displayed a wild smile and held up a thumb. We all did. What? The doctor's face contorted into an expression somewhere between shock and disgust. Not all at the same time, shouted Sean. Bruce held his hands up by his shoulders. I didn't even know she rolled the D20 of love with the other guys until a couple of days ago. Still, the doctor looked over to Shirley. Miss Hill, certainly this can't be true. Sorry. Shirley let a sly grin creep across her face. My mama taught me to get while the getting's good. Manny put his hands over his eyes. This just keeps getting worse. Why couldn't I be an orphan? Fret not, young man, said the doctor. Manny, we've already witnessed your skin's special properties. He cocked his head to one side. Do you think you might have any other abilities? Maybe. Manny let his hands fall from his face. I'm strong. Interesting, said the doctor. Would you care to demonstrate? He scanned the room until his eyes settled on an object. Perhaps you could attempt to lift my desk. Manny said, No sweat. He hopped up from his seat and walked around the table. When he reached the desk, he wrapped his short arms around one side and leaned back. The desk came off the floor, and, within an instant, Manny was holding it above him. The young man looked like some insane furniture mover who was overly fond of limbo. That's amazing. The doctor opened his eyes wide. Let's try something else. He scanned the room again, and this time settled his gaze on Adam. You there, in the glasses, what's your name? Adam narrowed his eyes and answered, Adam. Adam, you're a big fella. The doctor beckoned for Manny. Put down that desk and get over here. Sure. Manny plopped the heavy oak desk back to the floor with a thud, then walked over to the doctor. The doctor pointed. Go around the table and see if you can carry Adam on your shoulders. Manny started to walk, then hesitated. Doc, you ain't some kind of pervert, are you? The doctor shook his head. Of course not. This is for science. Manny shrugged and walked over to Adam. Throw them big old legs up there, fella. Adam rose from his chair and scratched his head. Are you sure I won't hurt you? Manny clenched his jaws. Son, y'all already scarred me for life. Just shut up and climb aboard." "That's a fair point." Adam stepped behind Manny and slung one leg over the young man's shoulder. "Are you sure you want all my weight up there? I'm at least 170 pounds. Manny gripped Adam's dangling calf. "Man, you're 260 if you're an ounce. Now hop on up there." Adam put his hands on top of Manny's head to stabilize himself and flung his other leg over the little guy's remaining shoulder. He nearly lost his balance and dug his fingers into Manny's hair to get a better grip. "Easy on the do, man." Manny stood up straight and kept a tight hold on Adam's lower legs. "You better not let any squeakers out either." Adam gave his head a nervous nod. "I can do that." Manny turned to face the doctor, with his passenger perched securely atop his shoulders. "See? Easy as pie for breakfast." The doctor asked, "Can you walk around while he's up there?" Manny chuckled. "Just watch me, then tell me what you think." He took 3 long strides and leaped over the unclaimed chair at the table. His feet cleared the chair by at least 6 inches before he landed gracefully on the other side. Adam wobbled on his perch. "I'm ready to get down now." Manny said, "I don't want any more of your butt sweat on me nohow." He bent his knees and his passenger climbed off. "That's fascinating." The doctor rubbed his hands together. "He must be stronger than all 3 of his potential fathers combined." He paused and put a finger on his chin. "That means he has the strength of 2 normal men, yet he is but a boy." Shirley plopped her meaty arms on the table. "So, all your fancy doctor talk still hasn't told me who my baby's daddy is." The doctor returned to his seat with a frown. "Given the highly unusual circumstances at play, I fear we may never know with certainty the true identity of the boy's father." "Oh, no!" Shirley opened her eyes wide and shook her head. "Somebody's got to finish raising this child." She buried a thumb in the center of her bosom. "I'm still in the prime of my life. There's a whole lot of conventions out there. That means a whole lot of nerds I need to be pouring my sugar on." Kevin slammed his fist down on the table. "Damn it, Shirley, I'm not putting up with any more of your crap." He shoved back his chair and stood. "The show isn't paying for any of this testing." The doctor crossed his arms. "I don't see how you can be worried about a television program when this discovery could elevate my career to a whole new level." He looked across the table to Manny. "Young man, you need to stay here with me for extensive study." Manny raised a middle finger in the doctor's general direction. "I ain't going to be your damn lab rat." Kevin threw his arms in the air and shouted, "I have to come up with an hour of programming by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning." The shouts grew in volume and bounced back and forth inside the conference room. The previous discussion devolved into an indecipherable din of bickering. Adam stood up and cupped his hands at either side of his mouth. He shouted, "I have an idea!" Sean looked at Adam with suspicious eyes and asked, "What are you up to?" Adam glanced down at Sean. "Just trust me." Sean shook his head. "Not likely to happen." Adam shouted again, "Let's do the show! I think I have something that can make it work." Chapter 13. Smooth jazz flowed through the room in a manner that would challenge even the most severe insomniac to stay awake. This music was, perhaps, the most boring part of an exceedingly uninteresting green room. The unadorned walls were covered in a hue of green paint that matched the color of the coarse carpet perfectly. The room contained a small coffee table and a sofa upholstered in green vinyl. 3 unopened bottles of water sat upon the table. Adam, Bruce, and Sean sat on the green sofa and fought off drowsiness as they waited to be called onto the talk show's set. Adam and Sean laid claim to spots at each end of the couch in order to make use of the armrests, while Bruce wedged himself between his 2 cohorts. They expected to be summoned 15 to 20 minutes after the start of the show, but it felt like they'd been waiting for at least an hour. Sean tapped an impatient toe against the rough carpet. "So, Adam, what is your plan exactly?" Adam shrugged. "I thought it would be a good opportunity to promote our podcast." He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Kevin said there will be close to 1 million people watching." One hand dropped from his face, and the other placed his glasses back onto his head. "That's really your plan?" asked Sean. "We're going on a Who's Your Daddy show, and you think they'll be interested in an extended plug for our podcast?" He groaned and shook his head. "Sure," answered Adam. "It's a good podcast, isn't it?" He held his hands out as he asked the question. "Yeah, it's a great show." Sean lowered his eyebrows. "But I'm not too certain Murray fans are our key demographic." Adam raised one eyebrow and crossed his arms. And what, pray tell, is your estimation of the Murray demographic? Sean leaned forward and looked across Brice to Adam. I'd say it's largely unemployed people who haven't gotten around to applying for a for-profit college yet. Wow, said Adam. That's oddly specific, yet sounds entirely accurate. Sean nodded and leaned back. There's also some gullible folks hoping to get in on a good class action lawsuit. Brice shifted on his seat between his two friends. There are probably some sweet old people who can't figure out how to change the channel. Yes, said Sean. A few accidental elderly viewers will most likely see it as well. Adam leaned against the sofa's armrest and looked at his companions. There's bound to be a few comic book fans tuning in. Get real, Adam. Sean raised his eyebrows. Murray had an episode about a guy who was seduced by a bowl of chicken tetrazzini. Brice grimaced in disgust. I don't think I want that guy listening to our podcast. Adam waved a dismissive hand through the air. You guys are refusing to see the upside of free publicity. Sean put his elbow on the armrest and let his face rest in his hand. Even if viewers were interested in our show, we can't fill an hour plugging HMP. Adam nodded to concede the point. Maybe I could ride around on Manny's shoulders again. People would like that. Adam, he's not some trained circus performer. Sean glanced down at the floor, still leaning against his hand. He is our son, after all. At least for one of us he is. Besides, Adam, said Brice, you're familiar enough with superheroes to know they have to keep their powers a secret. Adam furrowed his brow. You think Manny is a superhero? Of course! Brice nodded with enthusiasm. He has super strength, his skin seems impervious to damage, and he's got a ridiculous, totally unbelievable origin story. Adam narrowed his eyes. Maybe there's something to that, Brice. He rubbed his chin. Don't worry, I've got something up my sleeve. Sean opened his eyes wide and asked, What? Don't worry about it. Just make sure you follow my lead. Adam curled one corner of his mouth up into a sly grin. Trust me. Sean sighed and lowered his head. Adam, no matter how many times you say it, it's not going to happen. Come on, pleaded Brice. At least give us a little heads up. Adam drummed his fingers against his knee in a moment of quiet contemplation. He turned to Brice and said, Okay, here's what I'm thinking. The green room door crashed open, cutting Adam's words short. The pimply-faced producer, Kevin, stood in the doorway, waving his arm as if it were on fire. Kevin shouted, Let's go! I need you on set now! Brice shot Kevin a startled glare. We were talking about now! Barked Kevin. His messenger bag bounced against his hip as he continued his frantic waving. The three men bounced up from the sofa and shuffled to the producer. Kevin slapped sticky name tags on each of their chests, and a lady appeared in the doorway to clip tiny lavalier microphones onto their shirts. Brice winced as the lady shoved a black box attached to the microphone into the back of his short-legged pants. I don't really know you well enough for that. He looked at his name tag and noticed it said, Brice. Kevin and the lady hastily ushered the three men along the short walkway and onto the set of the Murray Popovich show. The studio lights were blinding, and the beams they cast felt hot against the guy's skin. The crowd of onlooking audience members filling the studio seats all had their mouths agape as they gawked at the new guests. Manny and Shirley were already seated at the far side of the set, while Murray sat at the center stage with his legs crossed. The silver-haired host had a handheld microphone rather than the lavalier type that clung to the shirts of his guests. Murray beamed a wide politician's smile at the studio audience. And here are the three potential fathers. The audience booed, paused in unison to catch their collective breath, then booed some more. Murray said, Please, gentlemen, have a seat. He held an open hand toward the three empty chairs on the side of him opposite Shirley and Manny. Sean claimed the seat closest to Murray, Adam dropped into the middle chair, and Brice plopped down onto the farthest from the host. Murray leaned on his chair toward the newly arrived men. He glanced at their name tags, then said, Sean, I'll start with you. He leaned closer in a ridiculous fashion that had to be uncomfortable. How do you feel about the possibility of being young Manny's father? Are you willing to accept the responsibilities of parenthood? Sean's eyes darted around the set to locate the cameras. How's my lighting? He turned his head in a stiff, jerking motion. I want to be sure my profile is framed properly." Murray's face twitched in annoyance. "Don't worry about that stuff. Our crew are real professionals. How does the prospect of being a daddy strike you?" Sean's eyes danced around the studio while he spoke. "Listen, Murray, I know a thing or two about the business." He sat up straighter and put a casual smile on his face. "If you don't get the right shot, none of this will work." "Listen, fella," Murray shot an icy look at Sean. "I didn't get to be the #1 daytime talk show host in West Memphis, Arkansas without knowing a thing or two about show business." "Interesting." Sean crossed his hands across his lap and leaned forward, making sure to keep his shoulders straight. "Tell me, are you familiar with Talking Baby?" Murray stood. "We'll come back to you in a minute." He stepped in front of Sean, blocking him from the camera. "Adam, have you done anything to prepare for having a possible new addition to your life?" "Funny you should ask, Murray." Adam smirked and continued. "We've been working hard to put the best possible content in Hero Movie Podcast each and every week. It is, without question, the best podcast about superhero and comic book movies you're apt to find." He turned his attention to the studio audience. "It's available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, everywhere really." "This is about Manny," shouted the host. "Nobody cares about your pissant podcast." Murray shook his head. "I can't let you hijack my show with your shameless self-promotion." Adam's face grew long in an expression of mock surprise. "How dare you besmirch my reputation in such a manner? I would never indulge in self-promotion of my show that connects each and every movie we cover back to Hollywood's favorite son, Sylvester Stallone." He looked at the audience again. "It has over 100 five-star reviews. We call them humdingers." Sean called out, "Humdinger!" Murray's face twitched again. "I swear to God, I'll have them kill your mics if you don't shut up." Adam nodded. "You got it, Murr. No need to kill the mics." Murray took a deep breath and looked at Bruce. "So, Brice, what do you have to say?" "It's Bruce," answered Bruce. "What's Bruce?" asked Murray. "My name," answered Bruce. "My name is Bruce." "No, it's not." Murray pointed at Bruce's chest. "Look at your name tag, right there. It says your name is Brice." Bruce said, "It's wrong." "What's wrong?" asked Murray. "The name tag," answered Bruce. "It has the wrong name on it." Murray's face twisted into a vicious sneer. "Maybe you have the wrong name, Brice." He covered his microphone with one hand and leaned over close to Bruce's ear. "Don't try to make me look bad on my own show, buddy. I'll bury you." Bruce's face turned white. "I'm sorry, sir. I was mistaken. My name is Brice." Murray said, "That's better." He took the hand off his microphone and walked over to Shirley. "Shirley, do you have any gut feeling about which one of these nerds is the father?" Shirley shrugged. "I don't know, Murray. My guts have been feeling all kinds of things lately." Murray winced. "That's unsettling." He smiled at Manny. "How about you, young man? Is there one of these guys you feel more of a connection with?" "Nah, man." Manny shook his head. "They all seem like losers to me." The crowd erupted in cheers. Shouts, hoots, and laughter echoed through the studio. Murray looked off stage. "Kevin, bring me the results." Kevin scampered onto the set, handed Murray a white envelope, then quickly disappeared. Murray raised the envelope. "In my hands is the sealed envelope." He lowered the white paper rectangle. "Courtesy of Dr. Ezekiel Hammerclaw, one of our good friends over at KinGen Genetic Testing. I have the conclusive results of the paternity test." Manny wrinkled his forehead. "What? I thought—" "Can it, kid?" Murray interrupted. "Don't ruin my reveal." Shirley's eyes grew wide and fiery. "Old man, talk to my boy like that again and I'll break both of those bony legs." She pointed at Murray's bony legs. Murray took a nervous step back. "Keep calm, please. This is obviously very emotional for everyone." He turned to the studio audience. "I can feel the tension building. So tell me, studio audience, are you ready to find out who's the daddy?" The crowd clapped and shouted, "Yes, yes, yes." The replies were shouted in unison like some sort of religious chant. "Yes, yes, yes." Murray tore open the envelope and widened his eyes in feigned surprise. "I can't believe it." He lifted his eyes from the envelope's contents. "This is a first for the Murray Show." His hand dropped to his side, still clutching the slip of paper. "The world-renowned experts at Kinjin report the tests are inconclusive." The host held his hands wide. "They have no idea who's the daddy." The crowd booed with a level of disdain normally reserved for serial killers among normal folk. "But wait, Murray." Adam shot up from his chair. "We have an announcement." He tugged at his companion's shirts, and they stood beside him. Murray stiffened his jaw. "This better be good, Buster." Adam put his arms around his friend's shoulders. "We all want to be his daddy." Bruce's mouth fell open. Sean squeezed his eyes shut and gritted his teeth. A huge smile leapt onto Murray's face. "That's amazing!" He stepped closer to the three self-proclaimed daddies. "It's like 3 men and a baby, only instead of 3 men, it's you guys." He looked across the stage to Manny. "And instead of a baby, it's this little butt munch." Adam smiled and nodded. "That's right, Murray." Murray turned once again to the audience. "What do you think? Is this a good solution to the problem?" The crowd clapped and shouted their endorsement. Murray looked at Shirley and let a softer tone come into his voice. "And you, Shirley, how do you feel about this?" Shirley crossed her arms and let them rest against her ample bosom. "Murray, I've been doing this on my own for 12 years. I'll take any help I can get." She smiled. "I think it's fabulous." Manny frowned and turned his face away from the others. Sean pulled Adam close. "I don't know what you're working at here, but it better pay off." Adam patted Sean's shoulder, his arms still draped around his friend. "Don't worry, just trust me." Sean's mouth became a hard line. "Quit saying that." I hope you've enjoyed this installment of Nerdspawn Genesis. Another installment should be available super duper quickly. A reminder, you can purchase the ebook or paperback of Nerdspawn Genesis on Amazon. There should be a link in the show notes. Also, you can check out my other novels, Dragon in the Needles, Dragon in Gallus, Dragon in the Darklands. You can check those out by picking up the paperbacks individually or the ebook omnibus version, Dragon Blinder, on Amazon. And of course, there's also Chubby Wizard, Wrath of the Manticore, available as both ebook and paperback on Amazon. My author link is amazon.com/author/Bruce Leslie. I'll try to put a link to that in the show notes. You can email me at laundryroombruce@gmail.com. That's laundryroombruce, all words spelled just like you think, @gmail.com. I am at HV Podcast on Twitter, Heroes and Villains Podcast on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram, but to be honest, there ain't nothing to see there. So I hope to see you again soon in the world of Nerdspawn.